see if I can film going down this steep hill. It rained yesterday, so it's slippy, I might fall. So yeah, last month I read the Silmarillion for the first time, and I also finished the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, and the month before I read the Lord of the Rings. So I'm having a kind of fantasy couple of months, and you know, classic fantasy, not new stuff, and I'm having a great time with it. So first of all, the Silmarillion, I'd never read it before, and I read it because there was a Substack I follow that was doing a read-along. Kelly Brimble, I can't remember her name. Brianne is the person's name. I'll put a link in the description. And she led a group through the Silmarillion over 2 months, was it? Something like that. And, you know, I read Lord of the Rings. It was a pure mood read. Hadn't read it since the 90s, I don't think. And I had a great time with it. Watched the films as well, so you might say I'm kind of immersing myself in it a wee bit, which is delightful at the age of 50 odd. What am I? 54, I think. Yeah, so that's been really a good thing to do over the summer, and to follow up with the Silmarillion was excellent. It's a very challenging book. I did struggle with it in parts. There was one part in particular where I was tired and I was at a wedding that, you know, I don't like weddings, I don't like parties, anything like that. And I sneaked away from the reception and went and sat in the back of my van. So I was sleeping in the camper van, sat in the back and read a bit of Silmarillion for an hour, and I forget which chapter it was, but it wasn't going in. It was just like, and I thought, I'm going to DNF this. It's just not going in, you know. But I'm glad I persevered, and I had some really good times with it. I got a new reading chair last month because we had a heatwave in the UK, and I think throughout the rest of Europe as well. So I got a reading chair for the garden, and I sat outside in the morning with a cup of tea, a bottle of cold San Pellegrino, and the Silmarillion, and yeah, it was just great. The story of Beren and Lúthien in particular, I loved that. And Turambar, yeah. I relaxed into it when I came to the conclusion that this is not a book to be read only once. And that's when I was like, right, okay, it doesn't matter if it's not really going in. Yeah, it was a way to just get the story into me, or the stories, because it is multiple stories, isn't it? The Akallabêth I enjoyed, but I spaced out in parts of it, which is kind of annoying because now I'm watching The Rings of Power, and I know that section had to do with Numenor and what the men did going against the wishes of the Valar, the gods, when they were instructed not to sail west, I think, and they did. So I've since watching The Rings of Power, and I'm sitting with the book on my lap, and I'm looking up sections of the book, and I'm looking up the glossary of names at the back and all of that, because I know Miriel's in it, and Al somebody, can't remember the names, man, I'm terrible with names. So yeah, all I'll say is it was a very rewarding read. I'm glad I read it, and I'm sure at some point in the future I'll read it again. It's like homework though, you know, and you have to be keen on the lore to learn the history of the world that Lord of the Rings is set in. And I am, so yeah. And it's the same with Thomas Covenant. You know, it's set into 3 different chunks. There's the first Chronicles, which is just called the Chronicles, because at the time, I don't know if the second Chronicles were planned. So the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, followed by the second Chronicles, and then the last Chronicles. And in the last Chronicles, we get some lore dumps from history, and I love that. You know, especially to learn about the Demon Dim and the Urviles and the Wainhim, to learn all about those creatures. But yeah, so to Covenant, The Power That Preserves is the last book in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. This is my third read, and my first read probably since, oh no, actually I read it in Luxembourg, so that would place it somewhere in the early 2000s. Was the last time I read it, so what would that have been then? In my early 30s. So, yeah, in my 50s it hits different, as the kids say. I think I'm really beginning to understand what it is about these books that keeps me coming back. It's the idea that one's self-loathing can be externalised, placed in a fantasy setting, and then battled, you know. And Thomas Covenant himself, who's kind of the quintessential anti-hero, although I've just watched Breaking Bad as well for the second time. What is Walter White, if not the quintessential anti-hero? But Covenant came first. And yeah, he's got his flaws. And are his flaws justified? You know, a leper who's shunned by everyone who loves him, his wife and son leave him. His town castigates him. He can't go anywhere. It's a grim life, and he's then transported to a fantasy land, which I always imagine looks a bit like this, actually. You know, this is a pretty groovy place. It's partly why I enjoy hiking, because I always think of it as a fantasy quest. But yeah, so he finds himself in a fantasy land, and he has to battle his own self-loathing in the form of Lord Foul. And he finds himself in a land which is, as I described yesterday in a Discord post, excruciatingly beautiful. It's so beautiful that he can't handle it, you know. He doesn't feel that it kind of goes against everything that he stands for, because for him life is pain, life is ugly, life is brutal, and the only way to survive it is to be brutal yourself, in the way that he has to go through a regime that keeps him alive, because any slight bumps or abrasions can cause death, you know. So he does battle with his self-loathing, and I suppose the fact that there is a second Chronicles and a last Chronicles will give you some indication of how it goes down at the end. But it's the way that it goes down, you know. It discusses all the way through, I think, all 10 books, paradox. That's kind of at the crux of the whole thing. And Covenant bears a white gold ring. Ta-da! So yeah, I've got a white gold wedding band for that reason, because I'm a fan of Covenant. And the white gold comes into the land as something external, something that is not of the land, of that universe in fact, and it brings with it the wild magic, the magic that with which he will either save or damn the land. And there's your paradox. Can you do both? Well, read the books and find that out. But, you know, it makes me think of the scene in The Matrix, at the end of The Matrix, when Neo finally gets it, the idea that fighting is not the way to do it. The way to win is to let go. And, you know, when you see him finally in that scene, I mean, spoilers, you've probably seen The Matrix, it's old enough, right? When he's fighting Agent Smith at the end and he just lets go, and all of a sudden it becomes effortless, you know. I suppose the concept of Wu Wei is a bit like that as well. I can't remember where I learned of that, but probably Winnie the Pooh or the Tao of Pooh. You know, the idea that passive resistance, is that what it is? I don't know, but harmony, I think of it as harmony, where if you let go, you become more powerful than you are if you fight. So that's kind of the paradox for me, is that fighting without fighting, it's saving or damning the land. And Covenant finds himself in the eye of the paradox. And it's just so beautifully written. You know, and as for me personally, you know, I've been through addiction and alcoholism, and thankfully, thank God every day that I've recovered from that. 20 years sober, 21 in October. But that's not to say that I don't still indulge in self-seeking behaviour, self-destructive behaviour, whether it be through sloth or bad eating or being unkind to loved ones, you know, resistance, sitting at home when I should be up here, which happens most days. You know, I love to get up here and yet I sit at home and think, oh, it's raining or there's diggers up the hill tearing up the paths. Maybe I'll just stay home today. And then I go to bed at night and I think, that was not a good day. You know, that's the kind of self-destructive, minorly self-destructive behaviour, but nevertheless, it comes from the same place in my brain. So yeah, that's why I think I relate so well to Covenant, and why I think, you know, reading about someone who finds a way to battle his self-loathing and, you know, wins in the end, kinda. And this is what you get from good books, you know, whether it be fantasy, whether it be classics, whether it be whatever your genre might be. You know, there are other worlds than these. And yes, of course, I'm reading The Dark Tower again right now, which is fantasy / horror. Reading The Wastelands at the moment, and the scene that I read yesterday where Jake finds his way back to Midworld in the haunted house. I mean, that's horror. But to get to a fantasy land, it's like, yes, I'm there for that. I've read them all before, so this is a trip as well. Yeah, there are answers in books, and the answers change. The books don't change, but the answers change as we change. That's why I love good books, man. That's why. What I'll say is Thomas Covenant is criminally underrated on BookTube, and I'm finding, well, because I've just reviewed The Ill-Earth War, I've got more content coming up in my algorithm, which pleases me no end, and I'm watching quite a lot of it. So it's great to see that there are people out there, young people even, who are finding Thomas Covenant for the first time and coming online to talk about it. I'd just like to say, if you haven't read it and you love fantasy, what are you doing, man? Get it read. Get it read.